What's up, humans? Welcome back to the Human Music Podcast. This is episode 50, Moonsplatta Goes with the Flow State. So, we made it to 50 episodes. To celebrate, we have a special guest, the one, the only, Moonsplatta. He's an accomplished producer, DJ, and Dojo Sensei. Moonsplatta left a career as an astrophysicist to pursue music full-time. He's here today to talk to us about his love for sub-bass, his songwriting process, blending analog modular gear with digital tools, his favorite softwares, and his thoughts on workflow and flow state. Make sure to check out our sponsors, Dojo TV, where you can get free producer live stream classes from the Producer Dojo Senseis. And this podcast was recorded live, so you could have been there asking questions in the chat. That's free, so click the link. Also, the Dojo Max membership, where you can get monthly private lessons, unlimited track feedback, and the weekly download archive from Ill Gates. It's an amazing value, and Moonsplatta in the podcast talks about how huge a value the dojo and mentorship in general has been on his production career, and you can get that benefit too. Next up, guest practices, where you can learn engineering from Seth Drake at the Approach Institute. He's high-key the best engineer we all know. And with guest practices, your first class is free, so you can see how amazing that knowledge actually is before you pay for it. And you'll want to. It's absolutely worth it. Finally, Gvngaroo Records music distribution. Once your tunes sound amazing, you'll need to get them out to the world, and there's no better place to do that than with Gvngaroo. You can get unlimited uploads for under $10, and they throw in a lot of those extras for free that a lot of their competitors make you pay for, like getting your music on Shazam and YouTube Content ID. Key things for your music, but Gvngaroo keeps it real. They're a bunch of musicians that are doing this for the music community. Well, all right, y'all. Those links are down below, but without further ado, let's get right into the podcast with Moonsplatta. Hello, people of Earth. This is Tesco with Rip Kenny and Trap Jesus, and you're listening to the Human Music Podcast. Woo! Human Music Podcast. I like it. Oh no, it's Dojo TV. What's up, guys? What's up,
ninjas?
Yes.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
What's cool?
Hey, let's see
what's good.
Anybody on? Either way, we're here. And it's your favorite friendly human music producer host. I'm Luke Rain.
I am Rip Kenny. That is me.
We got Rip Kenny over here, and we got Tesco. What's up,
Tesco? What's up, man?
And very special guest we've had. We've wanted to get him on for a while, so we're super happy to have him here with us today. And it's extra special to get to have him on Dojo TV because he is a sensei over at the dojo, a black belt, overall just great dude that I've got the pleasure to hang out with in person a couple of times. It is the one, the only, Moonsplatta. Big up.
What's up, guys? Aloha.
Aloha.
Yes. Aloha.
Man, not as warm as you.
Yeah, probably not.
It was a balmy 15 degrees here this morning, so I'm sure you're probably a good 60 degrees difference then.
Yeah, it doesn't really get less than 80 around here usually.
Damn, that's awesome.
I definitely don't. I don't miss the Chicago winters. That's the one thing about that city I'm not missing. Although I did love living in Chicago. That was a pretty awesome place. I do miss parts of it, but not the fucking winter. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I believe it. I've been to Chicago spring, and it wasn't that nice weather-wise. It's real windy.
Oh yeah, spring doesn't really exist there. It's like winter's like half the year.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So thank you for joining us, first of all.
Yeah.
Why don't we start off by giving the people that might not know you super well a little bit of background on you and your musical journey thus far, what kind of got you into music and what's kind of interesting you nowadays.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been like a lot of people making music for most of my life. Picked up the piano when I was pretty young, and then the guitar a little while after that. And it was like, growing up, musical taste changed a lot. Like I'm sure you guys know. Like, so went from, one of the first things I got really into was actually Phish, because my aunt like bought me a Phish CD when I was, or like played a Phish song when I was like 5 years old, and it was just really funky and weird, and I like loved it. So like one of the first CDs I ever got and got really into was like a couple of Phish records. And then as I got older, got into like metal and stuff, and got really into that for a while, and was like playing guitar and keyboards in metal bands. And then moved to Santa Cruz for college in 2008. And that's when everything really changed. Santa Cruz is a fucking crazy place. It's like, I don't know, this town full of like surfers and burners and wooks and deadheads and bassheads and like
Yeah.
and then college kids, and just it's like there's a lot going on. And so like right away I was introduced to bass music, like sitting in my friend's dorm room smoking bong rips, and he like plays this music. I didn't know what it was. It was like electronic music was something that was like really alien to me at the time. Like it wasn't really big in Salinas when I was growing up. Like you're either into like people were into like hip hop, like Bay Area hip hop, or like metal or whatever. But like I didn't know anyone who was like going to raves or into EDM.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Santa Cruz for college, and like everyone else there is like kids from the Bay Area or like LA, and like it's all they're talking about are raves, and like the raves they've been going to, they're like trading candy, and I'm just like, I don't like, what is this? This is so, I didn't know this is, I thought raves were like a thing from the 90s, like I didn't think it was a thing that kids my age were like doing. It was just like totally foreign, And so it was pretty crazy, like sitting there and just like hear this music that was so much more, aggressive, but still groovy. And like, I didn't know synthesizers could sound like mean, and this is still 2008. So it's like the before dubstep really like it changed, right?
Yeah.
And then the next day, like I'm sitting in the same room, and we decided we tried to get mushrooms, but we ended up finding some acid and then ate that, and then hearing the same song like in that room, coming up on that, just like watching my friend's face melt, and just like all of a sudden getting it, and then just like, okay, I need to figure out what this sound is, It was like, that's been the rest of, the last, what has it been, 13 years, just like obsessing over this like fucking sound.
Yeah, it's cool.
So
The early bits of dubstep, at least that I heard, like, because I was much the same. Like I had a huge metal phase in like middle school, high school, and like a lot of like the early bass music stuff that like caught my attention. Like it had kind of like a metal aesthetic to it. Like it was very like aggressive, but in a way that like you were just like, what the fuck is this? And then like electronic music before that, to me, it was like everyone just called it like techno, but it wasn't techno. It was like, you might liken it to happy hardcore, like as a genre today.
Yeah, like I remember when I was in high school for a little while, I got pretty into like computer games and stuff, and me and a lot of my friends played World of Warcraft. Like all the people in my band were all playing it. We would play that, and we ended up becoming friends with these like Canadian kids, and they were really into trance, and they would talk about Tiesto all the time, and I had no idea what they were talking about, and I was like, the fuck is trance? You mean like techno, right? It's like, no, techno's like a genre. Like, oh yeah, okay, dude, whatever. He's clearly talking about techno,
Yeah.
And then he sent me some song. It was like a Paul Oakenfold remix of a Tiesto track. It's like, this is my favorite song I've ever heard. And I remember being so like confused by it, because I was like, this sounds cool, but it's like, I felt like I was waiting for something to happen the whole time that never happened, and it was just really didn't make any sense at the time, when I was like 16 and never had done real drugs, and like was into music that was like really complicated and constantly changing, So
Sorry. I was just gonna ask, do you have any like specific songs or moments you recall from that phase where you're like, okay, that song's the shit, or like, damn, that dude looks like he's having fun, or whoever, like, I want to do that too. Was there that turning point for you, or do you feel like it was kind of like a slow, gradual transition?
Oh no, it was immediately like I heard this track and was like, all right, this is something I need to figure out how to do. And then like being in Santa Cruz was at the time was like, you know, right away, my friend, like I was friends with people who are really into spinning fire and stuff. Like one of my best friends, you know, he was the best man at my wedding. He's like really good at fire spinning. And we were there and he would, you know, we would go do fire spinning stuff. He found like this, you know, renegade fucking party in the forest because of his fire spinning buddies. And then that's how I found, you know, the renegade Santa Cruz forest parties. And that was like some of my first experiences with that. And like that back then, you know, that's the same time like Minnesota and G Jones were students there too. And so that's how I met those guys, because we were all kind of hanging out doing these like forest parties and shit. And
Wait,
and so I kinda, like,
did you
jumped
just
into that right
lightly
away.
did you just
What?
lightly drop the fact that you've met Minnesota and G Jones before they were famous?
Oh yeah, no, I've known them for a really long time.
What
Like
the
one of my
fuck?
homies was roommates with G Jones. Like he like I it's Santa Cruz is a pretty small like scene, you know. So what like you know everyone kind of a little bit. So like I used to do forest parties with Minnesota and stuff, and like you know,
That's
so
tight.
a lot of my friends are like pretty close homies with G Jones, and Push Loop is also a really close friend of mine who I met like 10 years ago back then in Santa Cruz. I met him through my friend Zipsy, who isn't that well known yet, but he's really fucking good, and he's definitely going to blow up at some point. But like, you know, there's that's just the kind of place it is. There's a lot of creative energy there. There's like this really, you know, there's tons of artists just like making art like for just, you know, like
Yeah.
basically being poor by choice and stuff, and you know, being on the street like spinning koi and juggling and making art just because it's, you know, it's fucking Santa Cruz and that's
Yeah.
what you do, you know.
Yeah, because it's expression. I feel like, God, I wish I could teleport back to a renegade forest party at Santa Cruz in the late 2000s. I feel like that those were the right ones to be at back
Yeah,
then.
it was super fun.
So how did that look like for you when after you'd already dedicated and you're like, all right, this is the shit, this is what I'm gonna do? How was that transition? Did you have any buddies that could like show you, you know, how to get your feet wet, or were you just like YouTubing frantically to find anything you could find? Like, how did those next couple years look?
That's a good question. Well, like, I mean, basically, summer after my first year of college, I decided to sell my guitar amp. I had like a PV 5150 half stack. It was like, I wasn't really planning on playing in bands anymore. So it's like, you don't really need an amp like that. Like, your roommates are going to hate you if you, like,
Right.
you can't, there is no low volume setting, you know, on a speaker like that. So I was like, fuck it. I sold it, bought some Technics, and started buying like dubstep vinyl, which was really fun because there's a couple of little like record stores in Santa Cruz that would always have really good dubstep vinyls. And so me and my friends would sometimes even buy just random shit because it looked cool, you know, like I didn't really know what I was doing yet. And so that was kind of how we got started. And like I didn't even know that like I didn't know that wasn't gonna what I needed to like play my own music yet, you know, like I didn't know anything about DJing. So I was still just kind of like fucking around with these records, downloaded Reason, was using Reason, that eventually was like, I think this Ableton thing looks cool, and, you know, found Ill Gates because, you know, because of Bass Nectar, like a lot of people do. I mean, and that was like the first real show I ever went to was Bass Nectar in Santa Cruz, which is like, he went to school there too, you know, that he was part of that whole thing. So that was like, you know, a pretty big moment also. And of course, you know, you find Bill Gates pretty quickly through that, start learning from his videos. And like my progress was slow for a little while because I was also getting a degree in astrophysics, you know, so it's like I wasn't like doing you know, it was a lot. It's like even for me who wasn't necessarily the greatest student ever, you know, but I still had to work pretty hard to get a fucking B average or whatever I did.
I was gonna say like,
yeah,
but at the same
astrophysicist.
time, like, yeah, but at the same time, you know, trying to like DJ at forest parties and do all this stuff. So it's like, you know, it was a lot at once. So it's not like I was, you know, making timer beats and like cranking out shit and really being an efficient producer. Like I wasn't able to really like dive into that until I graduated, and then, you know, had this moment where I realized like, oh shit, like I don't have to do anything other than work on music. And like I used to think I wanted to go to grad school and like try to do both, but then at that point it was like, no, I can't ever go back to school. Like that's just fucking crazy. Like you can't, you know, do two things that you have to put everything into, you know. It's like at some point you got to choose. But then I ended up getting really lucky because I had the degree and moved to Chicago because my wife was working on her PhD, and then got really fortunate that I got a job at Fermilab, because all you need is a bachelor's in physics to be a particle accelerator operator, and I had that. So it's like, fucking sure, yeah, I could do that for a couple of years, and that was really exciting and really interesting. And actually, like, I learned a lot about music from being there, because particle accelerators are kind of like giant synthesizers. It's really interesting. I like learned a lot about analog synthesis because of this machine, which like influenced me to start getting more into analog and modular stuff, which like then influenced how I use things like Ableton. It's like pretty crazy how like that experience like became part of the whole thing.
Dude, that's like the first of all, the juxtaposition of like going to school.
Oh, I know, it's funny. It's really it doesn't really make that much sense. But
and I was like, I'm not that good a student, but I'm getting a degree in astrophysics. But I don't really care about school. But I work at a particle accelerator lab. You know, like what the fuck? That's fucking awesome. Like,
yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense at first until you realize that like when you get to college and you're going to decide what you want to do, like doing something that's difficult like physics is easier for me because I like doing it than like something that you might think is easier. Like, totally. Like I could never get a degree in something else because I just don't want to fucking do it. But like, you know, I didn't mind putting in all that time to the math and physics because I liked it. You know, so it, like that's the only. It's because it's like, you know, I did really want to do it and I did like it, find it interesting, but I realized that, you know, seeing in my friends the ones who are really passionate about physics, and like, you know, my wife and all the scientists I know, like they care about their research as much as we care about our music, you know. And it's like at some point you got to make that choice. You know, you can't really have two things like that. So, you know,
so what did that turning point kind of look like for you? Like what was the moment where you realized that you wanted to take music as like your main thing, whatever that looked like?
Well, it wasn't so much of a turning point. Like I always knew that I was going to make music. It's just I thought I could do both for a while. Yeah. And then there was a realization of like because really I applied to a few grad schools, but like really only the ones in Chicago. So it's like University of Chicago and Northwestern are pretty hard schools. I didn't really have much of a chance. And then it's like I only had a couple other options. So I applied, didn't get into any of them. And like I could have reapplied, like taken the GREs again and reapplied, but it was like sitting there finally getting to make beats and not have to worry about other shit made me realize there's no fucking way I was ever going to do that. You know, like that, there's no way. And so that was what it was. It's just having the freedom to work on music and realize like I'd rather be fucking broke than, you know, go back to school. And like, again, it's not like I was worried about that. I had a degree. It's like,
in astrophysics.
Chicago. Yeah, I was just moving to Chicago and get a job or whatever. And like, you know, I didn't make any money at first, really. Like my first jobs were like, I worked at an ice hockey rink in Chicago, like sharpening ice skates in the pro shop. But it was actually pretty cool because it happened to be the rink where the Blackhawks practice. And they happened to win the cup that summer. So I ended up getting to see it because I was working there, and they like had a day where they brought the cup into the rink. So I was like, like a month into that job, got to take pictures with the Stanley Cup, which was fucking hilarious.
That's dope.
Right, that's cool. And then I like worked as a physics tutor at Malcolm X College for a little bit, and like that was cool, but it's still very part time. You're not getting paid very much, but so it was really like. And then what ended up happening was that's when Dylan did his Patreon thing to take on students. It was like 2015, and he's like, I'm going to take on students, $100 a month. You get like that 1 hour lesson a month. And I was like, definitely couldn't afford it at that time, but I decided, fuck it, I'm going to put it on my credit card anyway. And then got really lucky and got the Fermilab job like a week later or something. It was crazy. So then there's like this 2-year period of kind of really intensely learning from Dylan, and then also, working on the machine and stuff. And then a couple of years after that, Producer Dojo started to actually like form as we know it now.
Man, that's really cool that you said, you kind of took that leap of faith where you're like, man, I don't know if I have the money to do this, but I just feel like I really got to. And I saw another producer, Page Turner, that I am friends with on Facebook, posted something today where he was also talking about kind of, making sure to spend the money to get the mentorship he knew he needed for where he wanted to go. And he said, this phrase that's killer, just there's a difference between I can't afford to and I can't afford not to. And you got to figure that out in your life.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the really, a really important thing I learned from, doing physics and stuff is like how important, your mentors are, and like learning from other people. Cause like you can't learn something like, the cutting edge physics really on your own. Like a few people can, but like even Einstein couldn't be Einstein without the work of all these other people, like that's just how it works. You don't learn all this shit on your own. So like, why would music be any different? So I really started to understand the value of that like right away. And so, yeah, I was like, I was already paying for Dylan's workshops and doing them on my own. But when he was going to offer one-on-ones, it's like, yeah, that's just too good to pass up,
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Yeah, Jinx.
Man, so I'm curious to hear more about sort of where you're at now. What's been kind of, catching your attention lately? Love to hear, how the analog synthesis route has gone, and yeah, just hear a bit more about like what's catching your interest currently, and like what are you inspired by?
I'm pretty inspired by like dub music, like both like the new and old. Just I'm really into like delays and reverbs, and I don't currently have a sub pack because it broke, but I got it sent in for repairs, and I ordered a new one. So whenever I get that back, that'll that's been pretty essential to how I work now. Like I ended up leaving my subwoofer in Chicago because I just knew it was going to be too expensive to ship here. It was like $300 sub is going to cost you a couple $100 to ship to Hawaii. It's not really worth it. And so I kind of got used to working without it, and really getting used to how the sub pack feels. And like I sit here during the day, like I do all my work from the studio, whether it's working on music or doing other dojo work or doing my other like side job and stuff. And when I'm doing that, a lot of times I'll have the sub pack on and just kind of listening to really deep bassy music. And like I remember years ago being kind of like not really being sure how you make like subby music be interesting, because it's easy to like early on, the kind of drop focused music is more attention grabbing. It's a little easier to pick out like what kind of makes it what it is. Totally. And like the subby bass music really like makes more sense when you hear it on a big system. And so the sub pack is like kind of the closest comparison to that. And so when you really get used to like using that, it's easier to understand like how that deep music works. And so I feel like the last year my music's just been getting a lot like subbier and stuff. And I had a couple of tracks come out on the Wid Fam label, which is the Whittler's new like label, because he does a lot of like Twitch streaming and does feedback on there. And there's this group of producers like growing out of that, and so he wanted to make a label to showcase that stuff. And so I sent in a couple of my collabs with my friend Zipsy and one with Mafunka from the dojo, and those are both like pretty weird, out there, like bassy tracks, that I knew that they would love. So, they put them out on their compilations and stuff. And so, yeah, that's been a lot of it. It's like really, I really like deep, dark, and dangerous stuff. Obviously, like Turnian sound, I think is really sick. They have a really interesting like point of view, and I really like Mungo's Hi-Fi, which is like a UK kind of. They really hit that like edge in between the old style dub and like dubstep. Like they have some tracks where you can't really quite tell like what it is. It's like that's all, they have a lot of stuff that you're like, that's definitely dub. And then they have some you're like, okay, that's kind of becoming just straight dubstep now. And I think that's kind of an interesting like place to be, in between those two like older styles.
Yeah.
Totally.
I would say someone like Peekaboo is another artist that like some of his stuff feels like it's very old school dub influence, but like very modern sounding. You also made a really good point that I love, which is that like when you start making music, like the more like upfront, like in your face style, like dubstep type stuff, if you're into bass music, makes more sense to try and make yourself, because there's less nuance, right? It's like beat 1, boom, beats 2 through 4, no, like you can dissect it very easy and it's all like right there. But stuff like more dub influence stuff, there's a lot more nuance to it. You're like, why do I like this so much?
It's also tends to be like DJs tend to use it differently too.
Totally.
It's like it's a lot less like this like moment of well, I mean, it used to be all about the buildups and drops, although now I notice there's a lot more like, I don't know, just kind of like hard cutting to other like drops and stuff, and then or let the buildup play and drop or whatever. But like the older style has a lot more of like kind of blending in these like rhythms and creating a new rhythm with it, and then kind of more sneakily bringing in these like bass lines and stuff. And so it's a lot more of a like kind of progressive way of DJing, and so you can make your tracks differently because of that, and so it's a whole just kind of different like outlook on the style. It's more about like building a vibe and a groove around that.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to your writing process, I know this is such a bad question, quote unquote, but like, what's your process like, generally speaking? Like, do you tend to start with the sound design stuff, or are you trying to create that mood and vibe first and then create the bass line around that? Or how does that sort of go for you?
Lately I've been trying to do, think about more about creating vibes and moods first, because like especially if you're making more subby bass music, it's like you can drop the bass anytime. So if you set up that mood, set up, the anticipation, make the music first, it's like make a subby bass line. It's like, it doesn't take that much work, like, because the sub could just be a sine wave. I mean, there's a bunch of other shit I'll do to my subs, that are more complex, but like, you don't necessarily need that. And it doesn't have to be this like complicated thing, like, and you think about it, the music first, and just do what feels right. Like for me, I've been getting better results that way. And just, like one thing I try to think about is to avoid overthinking things and like, trying to impress people and make stuff that's like too complicated or whatever, is you realize that like the stuff that seems simple to you isn't simple to someone else, and if you just do what's natural and just worry about making music, like, that's what really matters, right? Like it doesn't matter how complicated this patch is, and it definitely takes, it's easy to say that, it takes a lot of experience to like get past all those things and stuff, but lately it's really, for me, it's been all about like building vibes, and then kind of going into the sub first and making really interesting bass lines with the sub. And then if I want more highs out of the sub, I usually do that by like, processing the sub, like clipping it and doing UAD processing and stuff. Like I have my Apollo, so that's a pretty big part of my workflow, and even I don't even have my analog stuff here. Like that's actually still in LA because the plan was I was gonna move, go back and play some festivals and get all my shit. And then obviously that didn't happen. And then I haven't really felt the need to get it because I've been really exploring more like Max for Live stuff and then using that is part of my workflow from what I learned in the analog world, right? And so like a lot of my sound design will come from, like doing really simple stuff like in like operator or whatever, and then kind of looking for connections throughout the project with things like the envelope and envelope follower and the expression control and using, arpeggiators and the velocity control on that to like make stuff move together, in more interesting ways. And so it's like what you're doing in each step isn't necessarily that complex, but you're just kind of like following your ears and connecting things together in a different way. So that's like a lot of what it is now.
I'm really glad that you've said that you've said a lot of what you did, because it seems like it's all coming from this approach of like keep the original idea fairly simple, and then for all of the articulation stuff is when you get a bit more crazy with the automations and adjusting parameters and stuff like that, which for sound designy kind of music I feel is a rabbit hole a lot of people get stuck in. At least the sessions I've done with people, it seems to be a common theme. I'm curious, because you've also been teaching for a while, if there are any topics that come to mind that you find yourself, going over a lot, or just anything like a big breakthrough that you've had that you enjoy sharing with other people that has helped them a lot. If there's anything that comes to mind, I'd love to hear a topic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, the things I just mentioned, those like Max for Live devices, that's something I talk about all the time because a lot of people weren't before aware of what was there, and this is actually like one thing I think is really interesting about the new Ableton update isn't so much anything new about it. Like the new stuff is cool, but what they did was they took these things that used to be hidden in the Max for Live menu, like the envelope, the MIDI envelope, the envelope follower, like expression control, like all these really useful utilities that a lot of people didn't know were there are now right up front. Like they're all in your normal audio effects. They're in that modulator subfolder and stuff. Or, even if you undo the folders, it's all there, like in front of you, these devices that used to seem like extra Max for Live stuff. Now they're just like, okay, no, like this is here, use them. And, for me, they've been crucial. Like I'll use like tons of those and everything, like, because what it is the envelope, for example, is a MIDI envelope that can connect to 8 different parameters anywhere in the project. So it's extremely powerful because you can now have like your operator sending out an envelope trigger to make your bass line, and then have that be modulating like a filter on another track or something, or like a saturator parameter on another track or something. So that's what I mean. Now you have this DAW working more like a modular unit, like Ableton itself. Like Mr. Bills talked about this in his masterclass. Like you approach Ableton like a modular system, and so you don't have to be stuck inside of these like VSTs and plugins. Like like everyone loves Serum because it's really powerful, and the real reason why it's so powerful is that you can like make everything move together really easily, right? Like that's the big breakthrough Massive had, and then Serum kind of like improved on that. But now you can do that in the whole DAW. Like you can connect LFOs to whatever you want. You can connect envelopes and envelope followers to whatever you want. And actually what I have more fun with, that rather than doing lots of LFOs, usually I go for the envelope follower first, because what that is it follows the change in volume of the track. So if you have like, an envelope on a sound or whatever early on, that's, making the volume do something, then you have the envelope follower over here that then you can map just whatever you want anywhere in the project, right? So then, if you're doing a lot of modulation with volume modulation, which a lot of stuff is, then you have your envelope followers tracking that to further modulate other stuff or whatever. So it's just kind of like, a different way of like thinking about process.
So I'm definitely someone that's guilty of like pretty much only reaching for the max for live LFO. Because like
there's a lot of shit there. Yeah, no. Well, and like it's not obvious any of it's there. And like, even for a while, even after I found the envelope follower and envelope, I still didn't know about a whole bunch of other stuff until like there's a really good Slink video where he goes over some of them. But like all that stuff in his video now is like right up in the main menu.
Totally.
So I think it'll be really interesting because it should change, I think, how a lot of people approach the software, because it's just kind of like there's way more options that you didn't realize were there.
Yeah. And I think so I just got like a full-on Euro rack set up over the last couple months.
Yeah, I can see it there. It looks
flex.
It's very fun. But like it's funny because you started mentioning these Max for Live devices. I was like, Jesus Christ, like all, and like mentioning like how it works. I was like, that's exactly how my brain is thinking about this. Like a lot of the stuff that you have to do in Eurorack is like very similar workflow to that kind of thing. Like taking an envelope and then sending that multiple different places. So it's not just like within one box. It's like this envelope goes to like all these other different boxes. And so like I feel like a lot of like what you were talking about with like the envelope and envelope follower are pretty powerful tools that now that my brain is thinking about things in that way could be really beneficial. Since you seem to be pretty dialed into some other Max for Live devices being a staple of your workflow recently, what are some others that you found to be pretty interesting lately, or that most people might not know about?
Well, the expression control one,
what is
I
that?
learned about fairly recently. And so that one, what that does is gives you parameters based on like the pitch bend and mod wheel and velocity. So like if you're using a MIDI controller and you want to do your pitch bend on one sound, that can modulate something on another channel or something. Right? So like, like those kind of controls you didn't know were there. And it's like a really simple thing. And once you realize it's there, you could like imagine all kinds of applications or whatever. And then now in the new live, there's a random parameter added onto that. So every time you hit a MIDI impulse gate, it has a random parameter that randomizes a number that you can map to something.
Yeah.
So that's what the new expression control has. So that one was pretty cool. There's also like, I haven't used it that much yet, but there's like a note echo now. So it's almost like you could think about it like a delay in the MIDI chain.
Oh.
So it's like you hit a MIDI note and then it echoes that MIDI signal. So
interesting.
And then yeah, I haven't really fucked with it yet, but it's a cool idea. And then I mean the other one I use like all the time is the arpeggiator, because the arpeggiator's extremely useful as a like not for necessarily arpeggios, but if you only input one MIDI note, it's useful for re-triggering that note at different rates. So you get instead of like that's how some people do those really crazy like hi-hat patterns. Instead of like inputting a bunch of notes, you have it on an arpeggiator and just automate the knob, like, and have that going to a sampler or whatever. Totally. But then that ends up having more possibilities because the arpeggiator has a velocity ramp on it and stuff. And so when you start tying that into like other velocity controls, you could get a lot of cool stuff. And then that's also why I did get the like kilohertz hearts subscription, because I've been playing with Phase Plant because I like the modularity of it and stuff, because that's kind of like the interface I want for this kind of workflow. Is like something that starts blank, so you can kind of just see the connections and then add what you need. And then, they've got that like, you can multiply signals in that, which is a really like kind of modular kind of, idea and stuff like that. So like all of those things are pretty fun because, I really like to have things, open and have all the possibilities open, so I could just kind of like turn a knob and be like, okay, yeah, I need to have that motion connect to this thing that I just did, you know.
Yeah. How is the Max for Live arpeggiator like better than the standard arpeggiator in Ableton?
Oh yeah, no, I guess that's not Max for Live. That's just, I usually use the normal one. But I mean, there are a bunch of Max for Live ones that do more complicated stuff. That like there's this one like I don't know, what do they call it? Like chaos generator one that sounds kind of interesting that I don't really know how to use yet, but it does cool stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say like stuff like the random parameter on the expression control, and I'm sure this chaos generator as well. That's one of the things that I like about the Eurorack is that a lot of at least the random module that I got to add to my Eurorack setup, it's a much more fun way of doing mud pies than just like drawing a crazy LFO in Serum or whatever. Like that's more like you can get more detailed with that, but you have so much control over like how random you want it to be, and like does it output like note voltages, or is it just like a slewed random curve? And there's like all these different possibilities, and like beat like syncing possibilities for both the random. There's multiple random outputs, right? But like it just feels like a very intuitive randomness to me, so it ends up sounding more musical, and like you can get more musical results with the style of randomness that Eurorack has kind of landed on. And so I feel like that, and I definitely need to check out Chaos Generator and all these other random things for Max Live.
You know what you would also like? There's actually there's CV controls too. So like there's a bunch of, you know, you can, and that's been a really like big kind of future goal, I guess, is I really want to like make more of a like, you know, comprehensive live setup that would, I guess, you know, run more like a particle accelerator and take the advantage of both the digital and analog aspects. Because that's one thing I realized, like, you know, one of the things that happens though is like when people get really into analog is they want to do everything all analog, which like that's cool, you know, but that's putting extreme limitations on your, you know, creative abilities to go all analog, because as great as it is, as good as it sounds and as cool as all of it is, there are benefits to digital stuff. Like you have more control over things like the timing and making complex patterns and sending envelopes and LFOs and things, you know, and like there's a reason that at Fermilab they updated the control room to be digital, but all the stuff in the field sending signals to the machines are still analog, because it takes a lot of processing to like generate those signals in real time and have them be accurate, you know. And so the same thing goes with the stage. Like you want to be able to have like make those sounds in real time and have, you know, control to be able to do like, you know, improvisation, you know, like obviously if I like jam bands and stuff, and you know the thing that draws people into, you know, the Grateful Dead is that sense of adventure, that like you're going to hear something familiar that like might go off the rails and then, you know, come back, and like that's part of the fun of it, right? And so like I kind of want to be able to recreate that a little bit, and I think the best way to do it is to integrate, you know, like a digital control center with these like analog, you know, sound generators, you know, and then you get the best of both worlds, which a lot of people don't do, because like, you know, like I said, people get really into analog and just like want to go all analog, and it becomes this like badge of pride, like I do everything all analog, like fuck you. Like, okay, but I'm gonna go do what I want and like make the music that I want, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I definitely, that's definitely one thing that I noticed as well when I was getting into Eurorack, doing all the research that you would do if you were building your own. You realize that there's like two contingents of people. There's like digital people that are like, what is Eurorack? And then there's like the people that are like analog only, and then like pretty much you end up like having kind of a shit sounding drum beat with like a lot of complex like evolving plucky sounds, but you like kind of missed the point somewhere in between there. And so like when I was building mine, I was like, the whole goal of this thing is very specific. It's like, I want analog distortion. I want like different sound sources and potentials that would make more sense to do in analog than digital. Like I'm not like trying to do anything that I can already do in digital. Like I'm only trying to create additional options for myself. And then I'm not trying to do anything that like, I'm not trying to make all, like you said, I'm not trying to make all the music in this, because then you're just like kind of missing the point, right?
Yeah.
But what you said about the live rig having the like digital control center with analog sounds, the similarity to the particle accelerator that you explained is absolutely fascinating to me. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, I mean, and like, you know, that was an extremely complicated machine that I had to learn how to operate. And so it's like, you know, you're thinking about it all the time. And so it really, you know, like definitely learned a lot about that. And I you know, appreciate that experience. And I think it'll be super fun. I just need like, you know, $20,000 more to like build the stage setup, you know. That's the big downside, is analog gets pretty pricey, but it'll be worth it one day, because, you know, I want to, like, I don't know, like DJing super fun, but there's more possibilities than just that, you know, like as the technology grows.
Yeah,
Totally.
It's no surprise to me that that the first record that left an impression on you being Phish, that you have some jam band tendencies in there.
Yeah, it was funny. Like, I finally saw Phish live when I was in college, like the summer after my first year. They played in at Shoreline over in like San Jose, and I actually ended up going by myself because my aunt, who, you know, got me into them, was supposed to go, but she didn't end up making it. She like lives in Seattle, and so I fucking just went by myself to this Phish show, because I was just like, I gotta see this. And, you know, definitely took some acid there, and it was pretty cool. Like, it was a cool moment, like, you know, having it finally like make sense.
Yeah.
These weird ass records that I've been listening to as a child, be like, okay, that fucking crazy part where it sounds like kind of garbage and then turns back into the song was kind of tight. Like, I like that.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely hearing that you were a kid that was both into like Phish and also metal, and then found EDM, just makes a ton of sense. You got that long black hair, but then the tie-dye shirt, you know, it's just like
right. So I did see question in the chat that I actually have a good answer in there. What do I do with phase plant? Well, my favorite thing about phase plant is the disperser effect. It's like kind of hard to explain what it does. It's like rotates the phase, is what they say. And like, you know, I say that and that's kind of just words until you hear it. Like, it's not a thing you're used to hearing, but it sounds fucking weird. And one of the things that I do a lot, and like the reason why I like phase plant, is because you can use a lot of envelopes. And so I use it for my subs, because then I'll do this. Like, there's this pretty neat Mr. Bill video where he like kind of does some like adds the third harmonic to get a little like, you know, some sideband harmonics to the sub, right? And you add a little bit of that and then rotate the phase a little bit, and you can get this like nice sub. And I was like, all right, well, what if I use phase plant? Because now I can have unlimited envelopes to then add movement to that rotated phase, right? And then what if I push that further by putting a disperser on it to rotate the phase some more and connect those same envelopes to that? And what I discovered is if you modulate the disperser frequency, you get a really like interesting, wonky, like pitch bend kind of effect that sounds surprisingly smooth for being like, you know, a DSP like pitch bend, basically, you know, like, and but it's not like a normal pitch bend, because you're getting this rotating phase that sounds really fucking warm and just wonky, like in a certain area. It's bizarre. It's just something you're not used to hearing. So like throwing the disperser just on stuff and moving it around is always fun. And then, you know, whether it's subs or like, you know, I think a lot of people use it for like drums and shit, but throwing it on subs was an interesting thing that I wasn't expecting to be that cool, you know?
you're talking about, like, so that each hi-hat sounds a little different or whatever?
Well, no, I mean, well, the disperser itself, I mean, like, I guess it depends where you put the frequency, you know, because like you could set it on the low end and have it like kind of beef up your kicks and stuff like that. Like people use it for stuff like that. And then, you know, I don't think, like, just kind of looking at the presets on it, it seems like there's a lot of like percussion things like that that are meant to kind of like give it some punch or whatever. But, you know, taking it on your sub and moving the frequency thing around ended up being pretty wild.
That sounds super cool. I would describe like disperser's effect as being like adding liquid to a sound, or like adding like plasticky liquid texture.
Yeah, it's weird. I've never heard anything like it before. It's pretty unique. So I'm into it. And then I like that with kilohertz you can use it as a standalone thing too, right? So if you're using your like, you could throw it on operator with your max 5 envelope and do the same thing that you're doing with phase plant. So it's not, you know, like, I mean, that's kind of my point earlier about not being stuck within VST so much, because they all basically do the same thing, you know, with a few exceptions, like something like that. And when you understand that, like, they're all kind of the same, it's all sine waves. You know, like, you know, it doesn't really matter so much what you're using, as long as you know you can connect it together and like find your way like that.
For anyone that doesn't have disperser or doesn't want to go shell out money to get it, if you want a similar effect, this is going to sound really strange, but put 20 OTTs on. I'm not fucking joking. Put 20 OTTs on the track and turn them all down to 0%.
That's funny.
I'm like,
really at 0%.
Yes, 20 OTTs at 0% produces a very similar effect to disperser. It has something to do with, and I'm not the one that came up with this. I'm pretty sure it was like a Mr. Bill tutorial or something, but it does work. And I've used it in songs, and like if you want, like I had like a harsh sound and I was like, I love this sound, but it's just not like really usable enough. Use that to kind of like just like smooth and, like I said, liquidify the sound. It works. It has something to do with the fact that like a multi-band like compressor, much like an EQ, as it like basically splits the frequencies, it like adjusts the phase. Like there's a lot of math and science that Moonsplatta would probably understand a lot more than I do, but it has to do with like the way that the thing works. Just
I think I know what you're saying. Actually, I think it's because like how these things separate the sound usually is by some sort of phase cancellation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happening is you're having like a imperfect phase cancellation.
Yes.
And by stacking it and multiplying that imperfection, you're going to get some sort of like, you know, artifact sort of rotation happening.
Exactly. See, I knew the man. I knew the man could explain it better than me.
There's a really good Fox Stevenson video I saw the other day where he basically talks about why he prefers not to use OTT. If anybody's interested, it should be really easy to find. And basically just shows like through an oscilloscope, like trying to create some basses using square waves. And then like when you put an OTT on it, it like fucks up the phase and you can see it in the oscilloscope. And then when you try to like limit and compress and all of that, you see how it falls apart versus like when you keep the wave intact, for example. So yeah, for anybody that's interested. But I'm surprised that happens even at 0%. That's the part that catches me off guard.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
it could be happening, but if you don't hear it, it doesn't really matter that much. Like sometimes people get like overthink those things, and it's like a lot of people use OTT, and I've heard a lot of music with OTT that sounds pretty good. So,
totally.
You know, I think people like overthink those kind of phase issues sometimes. It's like it's one of those things like the once you learn about phasing, you start looking for it and worrying about it, but it's like if you start doing something that sounds bad, stop doing that thing. Like that's the best rule I've realized. And I learned that from kind of hanging around Seth Drake, because before we moved to Hawaii, I lived in LA for like 5 months. And so I was like kind of hanging out there a lot. That's when Seth was living there too at the dojo. So I had a lot of conversations with him about this kind of stuff. And like, it didn't make sense at first, but then after like, really doing it and learning to like, trust my ears more, like there's a lot of shit that I think matters. It just doesn't matter.
He's
like,
blown my mind in that sense. Seeing some of the stuff he does in the approach where I was like, man, I would probably overthink this move or be like, oh, it's improper or, whatever. I shouldn't do this for insert reason here. And then just seeing him like slap an EQ on a vocal and boost the highs and not give a flying darn about, any phase issues or anything like that was eye-opening for me, because I always heard like, oh, if it's an important part, don't EQ, make sure you're removing with the EQ, make sure you're doing this. Man, same with anybody that's taken a session with me knows, but like if you haven't and you're having trouble getting loud mix downs, one thing I found works very, very well is just mix loud, start clipping shit. And like if you're making aggressive music, make aggressive moves. You're not going to be making bass music and doing some shit you saw from a boomer rock tutorial. It's not gonna translate the same.
Yeah, I agree. That's the biggest thing I learned from hanging around him was just like, I need to like not worry about these things and, just do what sounds right. And like, when it comes to sound design, I was being like way too cautious, and like, this is like, Bill talks about this in his recent masterclass too, that like, mixing and sound design are kind of polar opposites. In sound design, you want to be really heavy-handed and extreme and just shape the sound and do whatever, and then mixing's supposed to be more transparent or whatever, and you're just like placing things. And so, I realized that like watching Seth like taking the saturator and putting the soft clip on and cranking it to 36 dB, and then like you said, putting an EQ before that, like boosting shit, and then he did some really weird shit where he was like, he had an EQ and he boosted the highs. He's like wanted to get rid of an annoying frequency, so he boosted it into a multi-band dynamics with a hard, ratio going down that would then take it out. It was like,
what?
Wouldn't have thought to do something like that. And a lot of people would probably tell you not to do that because of the whole phasing thing, but it sounded good, so whatever. Like, you don't like overthinking stuff just interrupts your flow state, which is was a really good weekly download. I was like, as I've been editing stuff for the dojo, I watched that one many times and I really enjoy it, and I realize it's like such an important aspect, and that's why my workflows changed so much to what it is I've been subconsciously trying to like make it easier to just be in that flow state and not have these things that I like interrupt that. So and so it's like constantly like questioning stuff and worrying about these things, like just kind of gets in the way of that. And when you really get in tune with your own ears and your own taste, and you can kind of just let that be your guide. But I mean, it takes experience, right? Like, definitely does. To like, I mean, for one thing, understanding what your own taste is, takes a lot of like, you have to make a lot of tracks. You're not going to know that right away,
Totally. And I'm feeling too, like that kind of ties in with the point I kind of highlighted earlier that you brought up on like just keeping stuff simple, right? Because it's like, if you lose the workflow of it, doesn't matter how sick that bass is or how cool your post-processing is or whatever, but like, you could have the craziest one-shot sound, but if it's not articulated, it's going to sound bad. Or you could take a straight up a sine wave, slightly saturate it, and like start putting LFOs on it and stuff and get good articulation. And it's going to sound more interesting than this, quote unquote, more complex sound. So I think like a theory I've had, which I'd, be interested to hear your opinion on, is like, kind of this idea of like everything in nature follows the path of least resistance. And like when you can keep it simple for yourself and find what naturally comes to you and expand on that, then that's how you like find your voice as an artist. Like that's a huge part of it. And yeah, I'm kind of noticing that with you, as you're saying, like you're finding your sound more, you're more comfortable, you're more expressive, but your workflow is also very much like keep these ideas simple, focus on the vibe, get that down, you know, working from there. So I just thought that was, you know, worth bringing up.
I think, yeah, I'd never really thought about it like that, but that's an interesting point. I would agree. I mean, that's a like fundamental property of the universe. I mean, in physics, we call that geodesics, where it's like, that's like part of cosmology. We're like, like that's why planets move and stuff in these gravitational fields. It's like following the path of least resistance. I think that, like, since we are part of all of that. We are part of the universe. It kind of, I never really thought about it that way, but I like that. That totally makes sense. That, like, to make this, natural feeling sound or whatever. Because, like, the problem is you have this interface in your way. You have all this technology, this interface in your way, blocking you from, playing music like someone would on the piano, or like a singer just like feeling it or whatever. And so it's really beneficial to try to break that down as much as possible so that it doesn't interrupt that flow. And then you realize that, like, that's where the good music comes from. And then it comes back to that statement before about how, like, things that you think are simple aren't necessarily simple to someone else. And so you, like, just getting past that, like, need to, like, show off your sound design skills and realize that, like, it doesn't matter, like, then you can kind of embrace that a lot more and just follow the sound and, make music, not like show people how good you are at using Serum or whatever. Right.
Amen. Yeah, I think Dylan had a quote on one of his weekly downloads where he was talking about how, like, if you're trying too hard, then it's not effortless. And if it's not effortless, then it's not cool. And don't write music that's not cool.
Yeah, that's some good logic.
Yeah.
I think he told me right on that vein once was like, if it sounds like you're trying to do it, it sounds insecure. And then as soon as it's insecure, nobody cares, because right back to it, it's not cool.
Yeah.
And that, that Taoist follow the path of least resistance idea really does make sense. Like, what are you good at? How can you support that shit? Like, just roll with the simple stuff that comes naturally, because that is the purest artistic expression, not look how much I manipulated this.
Yeah, totally agree.
So one thing I was curious about was this sweet new track you got out with our guy Porch.
Oh yeah,
that bass.
Yeah, that one.
That's
a fun one. We were like, we actually made that one like over a year ago, because I went to go see his band play on New Year's Eve in Vegas, like before I moved to Hawaii, and that was super fun. We like watched them play, and then we went out to the casinos after, and we're just kind of like hanging out, like played some blackjack and stuff, and then I ended up like driving back to LA and making the intro and the first drop of that beat, and like basically like stayed up all night because I like still had energy from partying on New Year's, and made that, sent it to him, then went to sleep, and then it was dope. He like sent, by the time I woke up, he had like made a second drop and added those vocals, and it's like, all right, yeah. And then that was over a year ago, so we've been waiting a while to release it while we've been working on other shit. Like, we didn't know what we were gonna do with it. He ended up putting it on his EP, and he had Seth master that whole EP, so it sounds very nice and good, professional. And so that was very exciting. That one was super fun. But that was like it's kind of an interesting track. It's got like a pretty like energetic hard drop, but then like gets kind of bassy and deep after that, and then has this whole like UK grime vibe around it. So it was definitely a fun one. Yeah, me and him are making a bunch of music. We made like 10 more beats throughout February, because I just started like basically doing like hour timer beats like every day, and would just send them to him, and then he would work on them more, send them back. He was quick to respond with them, so we got them done really quick. And so that Couch Fam set that I have on Thursday has like, I think, 9 or 10 collabs with Porch.
Man,
Yeah, he's all over that mix.
Damn, son. Talk a little bit more about that set. First of all, what time is it? When can people catch you? And like what do you have in store for the people?
Let's see. I think it's 4:30 Pacific time on Thursday, and Mafunka's right before me, so that's gonna be fun. And I'm sure that'll flow nicely and know what I'm doing. And then I just did a 30-minute one because since I had to be all original, I kind of could possibly do 60 minutes, but I really would rather have the ability to be more selective and put together a good mix than throw everything I got, So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to just do the 30 minutes and make it, be able to use just like the top tracks and be able to reject some and be like, no, that's not the time for it, And so, yeah, there's a lot of unreleased stuff that we just made this year. There's, those two Whitfam tracks from, Kevin and Zipsy, and then a couple from my first EP, and then that collab I did with Unk shows up in there. And a lot of the tracks that me and Portia have been making have been actually like bootlegs, which is really fun. We've been sampling a lot of kind of roots, dub, reggae kind of stuff, which, that's kind of what it's all about, right? Like reusing those and reforming them and, dubbing them out. And so there's some pretty fun new bootlegs in there. Like we did a Mungo's High Five bootleg. We did I did a Bill Bless bootleg that turned out pretty fun. We have a Welcome to London cut, which he just got the Welcome to London acapella from Flo Dan's Bandcamp, which that was that one I knew about because Push Loop did a Welcome to London track that I really like and I would use in my DJ sets. And so I actually made a beat, sent it to Porch, and then he threw that vocal on it and it worked really well. All right, I guess this is Welcome to London now. But that one turned out really cool. And I mean, I guess that's not even I don't know what the rules are on that. I mean, I guess we can release that, right? Like if they're selling the acapellas on Bandcamp, that's what it's for, right? So that one we should be able to actually put out because I mean that's the whole point. It's kind of like getting something on Splice, right?
I'm not sure of the legal.
So it's a gray area.
I want to double check the on that SoundCloud.
No, I'm pretty sure it's like buying a sample pack. If they're selling you vocals, you can use it. So that's pretty sick because I really over the years gotten really at first I remember the UK style grime vocals being really intense and it's kind of hard to understand at first but over the years I really begin to appreciate that sound and so those are fun ones to use for sure.
Totally. Hey, I'm curious to ask about to bring it to the Moonsplatta EP and then talk a bit about kind of some breakthroughs you had while you were working on that, and then maybe what you feel has changed with your writing process or, what you're inspired by your current music compared to that EP.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that was a while ago. So that was since then, a lot of things have changed, because I was, the couple of years since that, when even was that?
It did get released in 2019, although I don't remember what month it was.
Probably April, so almost 2 years now. So I mean, the last 2 years, a lot have changed, and I've definitely grown a lot. So I would say what I was doing then is not at all what I'm doing now. That EP was really still kind of discovering a lot of stuff. There was a couple of tracks got replaced at the very end, after already working on it for a year,
I feel that,
you keep having breakthroughs and that's just how it is, and
yeah,
at some point you just got to call it done and move on. But obviously at the time I was still growing a lot and discovering shit, and it didn't, I mean, I think I was using Envelope Follower in that EP and maybe some envelopes, but was kind of just discovering that. And what I used it for, what first kind of how I discovered Envelope Follower was I was listening to a podcast with Kursa, and he like kind of mentions it as a way to match your sub to your like mid-range, wobbles and stuff. Because, if you have a low pass filter on your mid-range, that's changing the volume of your high-end frequency. So if you have a envelope follower looking at that band, that will give you motion to modulate your sub. And so that was actually like a problem I was trying to figure out for a long time. Yeah, like I'd been thinking about that, trying to figure it out. And then I heard that in the podcast, went home and started figuring that out, because it's a really good solution to like mud pie bass, for example, or whatever. Or if you have a modular thing, you're like making wobs with a knob, it might not be possible to automate that and recreate the pattern. It most likely isn't worth your time, let alone maybe not even possible, right? So it's like the envelope follower is a really fast, effective solution to that. And so that's like how I started using it. And so I was using that for some of the wobs in that EP and stuff. But obviously since then I found a lot more like, uses for it and all that. But, so it was definitely like, it was an interesting experience. Like, I did a remix of a track from Zipsy on there, and that like, I had just bought a Chord Monologue, the little like mono synth that they released, which like I bought that because, I was sitting there at Fermilab learning about analog stuff. And it was like, they started hearing about this synth that was going to be released from Korg that was going to have some Aphex Twin presets on it. Like he actually designed these presets, and it was only like $300 or something. It was a pretty like moderately priced analog piece of gear. So it's like, all right, yeah, got paid pretty well at Fermilab. So I decided, I want to fucking buy one of those. And so, like one of the tracks in there has a bass from that, which came from kind of like exploring mud pies and stuff on that little synth. And so it was like, a lot of it was still like learning some of those workflows and exploring this new gear, but this is like is still part of the process. Like,
yeah, I remember, especially when that came out, I really liked that EP, and I've actually listened back through it a few times since. There's a lot of gems on that one.
Thanks.
Yeah, I like. So how much of that EP was influenced from that analog kind of phase? Were you still in that phase at that point? Was that kind of
most of it really? It was the only track on there that wasn't really heavily made with that chord synth was I Know You're There, because that one's like mostly about the guitar. Like I recorded that guitar, like and then I think I made the bass with like Massive on that. Like it's just kind of like a not that complicated of like a wavetable bass that, has some saturation and stuff. Really, the whole focus of that track is the guitar, the samples that I totally stole from Half-Life and Portal and stuff, but like that, and that kind of, gives it the whole vibe of what it is. And I didn't quite understand that yet, that like, the value of that kind of simplicity of, the guitar being the main thing and the bass line being, really simple and rhythmic and stuff. Like I didn't know quite yet what made these things good, right? It was still like figuring all that out. But then the other three tracks were pretty much all analog and like kind of mud pie based, because that was, I think, for a lot of us, once you first start doing that, that's like kind of the most fun thing to do ever, right? And so it's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna like explore making these sounds with this thing, and so that's really a lot of like how that was. It's like exploring the mud pie sample synth kind of workflow.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job, because like what you were talking about, like once you understand like the mud pie workflow, it's like your tendency to do everything like that, especially in the bass music world. And I think you did a really good job of like taking and making those songs not so complex, having that being your workflow, like having still a very palatable flow to the songs rather than delving into just like, here's a cool sound, here's a cool sound, here's a cool sound, because that's like the easiest thing to do, and definitely matches with something you mentioned earlier, which is like you shouldn't be just sitting there trying to impress your friends with what you're making, because although that is a natural tendency, we actually just talked about that on an episode of the podcast. It's a very natural tendency.
Yeah, sure.
Like you're like, let me make something my friends are going to be like, wow, you know. But like,
and like, you know, coming from like, you know, metal and stuff, it's like I used to I wasn't ever that fucking good as I thought I was, but like I used to want to play lead guitar, and like no one's more of an obnoxious show off than a fucking lead guitar player in a metal band, right? Like I just can't even imagine like being in that mindset anymore. It's just like so annoying. You know, like that's all they want to do is show off their fucking skills sometimes. And it's like sometimes it doesn't fit. And you're like, stop that. No.
Yeah, I found that for my own music, at least, I am purely a rhythm guitarist. Like it's like if you were a lead guitarist trying to make electronic or bass music, like good luck, man. There's not enough room in your mix to show off all your talent.
Yeah.
Like like you got to know like what fits and how to use that appropriately. That's
I realized really fast playing fast doesn't sound good if you also want to use a lot of delay. You know, you got to have one or the other. It's like I think I like delay more than playing fast. So
yeah, like making.
If you want to use a lot of what? Sorry, you said effects.
Delay. You know, like high feedback delays and stuff. Like you're throwing a lot of notes into that shit, it turns into mud real fast.
Totally.
Yeah. So we got a question from Blue here in the Discord chat. Do you have any projects or a new EP in the works potentially? What are you working on now that we can expect to hear in the coming months?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, me and Porch made all those tracks. I feel like what we might do is at least like the bootleg ones, just give those out as, you know, free downloads at some point. And I mean, some of them, the roots ones, we might even be able to really release, you know, because like that's kind of like, you know, reggae artists don't care. Like that's kind of the whole like point. So some of those we might be able to do for real. And I don't know. I think now that I have this new studio set up that's like actually quiet, and you know I was able to position the speakers well, and it's like nice in here, I definitely want to make a bunch more music. And then I don't know, I think we'll like start releasing some singles just for fun, you know, whatever. And then I don't know, I might send them around to whatever. Like I know the Wid Fam like already said I could do an EP with them, and I definitely want to. I'm gonna send some stuff to Deep, Dark, and Dangerous just for fun, because I know we have a couple that I feel like they'll like, but I want to like, I don't know, probably make another like 10, 20 tracks and then see what we have, and you know, send him a lot. You know, me and Porch have been working on this stuff a lot, and I know he's down to keep making stuff, and he's, you know, we've got a really good like kind of system going where we're becoming really efficient with this. And so, you know, now that I'm all set up here, I definitely want to make a bunch more shit. I don't want to not release stuff, so I think we'll just start, you know, doing more self-releases and stuff, because, you know, why not? Labels don't mean the same thing that they used to, so, you know, whatever, self-release stuff, send some stuff out. I don't know. I mean, like it's hard to say because we don't know what's going to happen this summer, you know. We're kind of in a weird spot here.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. Of all types of weird spots, absolutely.
Yeah,
definitely been a strange year and a half, but it's dope to hear that you're still, you know, pushing and making the music. One thing I wanted to make sure we got in before we go is like, you know, so you've been on this journey for a while. You've, you know, been around the dojo, first as a student, now as a sensei. You've given a lot of lessons. Is there like any, you know, one or two, you know, things that you would definitely, for like folks who are earlier in their career, like what would you wish you had heard way earlier?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest, I talk about this all the time, and the biggest breakthrough for me was when I finally stopped kind of like resisting some of the things Dylan was trying to teach, like, you know, timer beats and using the recipes and stuff. Because this is all, like, it's interesting watching it the weekly download where he talks about timer beats, because he's like, oh yeah, I was like, 2016, I went on this fucking like journey and like toured the world and stuff. Like this is while he was, teaching us, right? So like I remember him like having shitty internet in Jamaica and like like doing this whole thing, and like he was kind of discovering this whole like process himself, and then being like, hey, you need to like use these recipes and do these timer beats. And at first it's kind of a weird idea because you're just like, what do you mean a recipe? Like I don't need a recipe to make music. That doesn't make sense. It sounds creatively restricting at first, right? Like I totally understand the tendency to want to resist something like that because it sounds like he's telling you what to do and impeding your creative process. But really what he's doing is creating, like making some sort of arbitrary decisions based on, patterns that keep reoccurring in music and workflow, and allowing you to like unlock that flow state better by doing this. And so when I finally he was seeing me kind of overworking a lot of beats. And this is even after having made some successful good tracks. Like, I've been making music for a while at this point. Like I made some tracks, I just didn't know why they worked. It was a really long, kind of painful process to finish something. And, then I was having sessions and sending in a project that would have like just too many ideas thrown into one thing, just completely incoherent, constantly changing. It's like, dude, you just need to like, just do the recipes, And finally I did one that worked really well. It came together a lot smoother. And then I did another, he got really stoked. He's like, all right, do this other one. I just bought that chord. So it's like, do this synth sampling one, which became known as the Mud Pie one. And that one turned out really good. And then he was like, all right, do 10 of those next month. It's like, oh, well, that sounds like a lot. I just spent a whole month on that beat. I used to spend many months on a beat. You're telling me to do 10. You're crazy. And then you start thinking about it more like, okay, well, I have this recipe, has steps. You can set timers in the steps. 10 beats is like 2.5 beats a weekend. I ended up making like 8, like kind of phase 2 beats, right? And then the next month was February. It's like, okay, well, now do 14. That's one every other day. And I didn't know FOM was like a thing. He's just like, now do 14. And then I think I did like 12. And then, so that was like, 20 phase 2 beats in 2 months, just like grinding out these recipes. And then that's when really everything started to like connect. And that's when the workflow became something that like I didn't have to think about. And I knew I could get from some crazy sound to a beat to a phase 2. And like, and like I only ended up finishing one of those beats, and it ended up on my EP. It's called It's Like That Now. That was during that period. But I always tell my students, like, those 19 other beats, I still possibly learned more from, because you really learn a lot when things don't work. And, you think about, like, why did you lose energy working on that beat? Why did it stop being fun? Why weren't that combination of the sounds like working together or whatever? And then also, if I used to spend 2 months on a beat, like, I'm still keeping up with that pace if I only release one of those. And so it's like you gain so much more from doing all those other beats. And that's something that it's hard to really understand until you do it, so that's the biggest thing. It's like, don't resist that part of it, because that's just practice. It's just building up your skills so that you can easily reach that flow state and, not have this whole complicated computer system interface like get in the way of you and making music, like that. Yeah. Those recipes and those timer beats, it's all just practice, just like playing your scales on the guitar so you can jam with people. You can't go in a room and just jam with people if you don't know how to play.
Yeah.
And so it's like the same thing being in the studio. And that's the thing that's hard to understand at first, is like, you think that it's all like in your head, just sitting there telling the computer what to do, but really it's not most of the time. Like maybe it is for some people, everyone's different, but I think for most people, you want to like make it natural and unlock that flow state,
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like that's the constant. Like being able to find ways to work in flow state more often is the one thing that is always a consistent thread, no matter where you're at in your musical journey. Like that will always benefit, will always create better music, and will always lead to a more fun, smooth experience if you're able to keep yourself in that flow state. It doesn't matter how big your tool set has gotten, how much knowledge you've learned about these different things. Sometimes that's an inhibitor to flow state. Like you have this new tool that you learned and you like just made this thing with it and you're like, this is really cool. I need to like make this work in the context of this song that I'm using. Like that's a pitfall. And like the constant of like, how do I return to being able to keep myself in flow state? How do I return to the process that works is always going to be something that benefits you and your musical output more than any technique or tool or knowledge. Like all of that is always going to change. You're always going to have a different setup. You're going to lose things, not care about things, learn new things, and it's going to grow and change. But if you can maintain that that physical sense of process, that is always going to benefit you. And I think that's kind of, it seems to be a thread throughout this conversation with you, how to like make sure that you're dialing in on the right things, you know, no matter what level that you're at. Like, how do you use the tools at your disposal to really benefit the project and the song rather than thinking about what you do or don't have or all of these other many topics or techniques that you could be using. So yeah, man, what else would you like to mention to the people, if anything, or any parting any parting words before you give all the ats on where to follow yourself?
I don't know. I mean, just I've had a good time chatting. I don't know if I really have anything else to add. I think that kind of covers the big like philosophical points that, I mean, these are all things that are like constantly going on in my head, it's like, especially as a teacher, like you're caught talking about this shit all the time. So I think we did a good job covering the main points.
Yeah.
Sick. If I could tackle +1 on for timers as well, I'm going to do that right now. Just say everybody should be doing timers.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, man, where can everyone follow you on all the socials? Where to keep up to date with you? And don't forget 4:30 PST this Thursday.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's just Moonsplatta, like at Moonsplatta for everything. It's a made up word, so you're not going to find it on anything else.
It's a good name.
That's a win.
Yeah, absolute win. Yeah, like I said, 4:30 PST this Thursday. Couch Fam set. A lot of unreleased material, as you guys heard.
And for everybody listening to this podcast not live on Dojo TV, we're talking 4:30 PST 2 weeks ago. You missed it. Why weren't you on Dojo TV?
You should have been listening.
Yes.
You should have been here. Come on.
Tisk, tisk.
Thank you so much for being here. Moonsplatta, you're the man. So many gems dropped, so many interesting stories. Really appreciate you, bro, and really looking forward to that music that's coming out soon.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Great kicking it with you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Peace, everybody. Right. Peace. And peace among worlds.
Peace among worlds.
That's right.
I like it. All right, humans. Thank you so much for being with us. We truly appreciate y'all tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, like, leave a comment and a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're at. We really appreciate you guys. And make sure to ask a question like, what would you want to hear on a future episode? Are there any guests we should try to get? Let us know. Make sure to support our sponsors. They are awesome products that we all use. Those links are in the description. And one more time to remind you, it is Dojo TV, where you can get free producer classes from all the Producer Dojo Senseis, and also watch this awesome podcast live and chat with the chat. Big up chat. You can get the Dojo Max membership, private monthly lessons, unlimited track feedback, and Ilgate's weekly download archive, all in one low price. It is amazing. It's like a whole producer university without that university price tag. guest practices where you can learn from Seth Drake at the Approach Institute, hands down the best engineer we know. His classes are mind-blowing. You will not think about sound the same after you go through his courses. And finally, Gvngaroo Records music distribution, where you can get unlimited uploads for under $10. Get those tunes out to all the goons, all the services, and do it for a lot cheaper than their competitors. Well, all right, y'all. We'll see you next week when we got Alexandra on the podcast. We're really excited to talk to her. Until then, peace among worlds.